My husband faked his own death to start fresh with his secretary. I was grieving until the crematorium director called and said, "Ma'am, there's no body in this casket, just a note." Months later, he called terrified after realizing I'd legally inherited everything including his mother's house where they're hiding. The phone rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the time because I'd been staring at the kitchen clock, counting the minutes until I could reasonably pour myself a glass of wine without feeling guilty about drinking in the afternoon. 3 weeks had passed since Michael's memorial service, and I was still moving through each day like I was underwater, everything muffled and distant. "Mrs. Patterson? This is Gerald Henderson from Peaceful Rest Crematorium." His voice carried an odd tremor that immediately put me on edge. "I need to speak with you about your husband's arrangements. Could you possibly come in today?" Something in his tone made my chest tighten. "Is there a problem with the ashes? I thought we discussed that I wasn't ready to collect them yet." "Ma'am, I think it would be better if we spoke in person. This is rather unusual." 20 minutes later, I sat across from Mr. Henderson in his sterile office, surrounded by pamphlets about grief counseling and eternal rest. He kept adjusting his tie, a nervous habit that reminded me of Michael when he was about to deliver bad news about our finances. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was thinking of my supposedly dead husband while sitting in a funeral home. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been in this business for 32 years, and I've never encountered anything quite like this." He opened a manila folder with shaking hands. "When we went to complete the cremation process for your husband, we discovered that the casket was empty. Completely empty except for this." He slid a folded piece of paper across his desk. My name was written on the outside in Michael's distinctive handwriting, the same scrawl I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards for 15 years. The paper felt ordinary between my fingers, but holding it felt like touching a live wire. "I don't understand," I whispered, though part of me was already beginning to comprehend something terrible. "Mrs. Patterson, there was no body in that casket. Someone placed this note where your husband should have been." My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. Michael's words swam before my eyes, written in the blue ink from the pen he always kept in his shirt pocket. *, my darling Rebecca. By the time you read this, Sandra will be convinced I'm dead and buried. The grief will consume her for months, giving us the perfect cover to start over. I've already transferred the money from our joint accounts, and once Mother's house officially becomes mine through inheritance, we'll have everything we need for our new beginning. Sandra never paid attention to our finances anyway. She'll never suspect the life insurance money and property sales will fund our fresh start. Let her mourn the man she thought she knew while we build the life we deserve. Forever yours, Michael Asters. The office walls seemed to close in around me. Every word felt like a physical blow, but I forced myself to read it twice, then 3 times. Michael hadn't died in that car accident. He'd orchestrated the entire thing, planned every detail while I was making funeral arrangements and accepting casseroles from neighbors. "Mrs. Patterson, are you all right? Should I call someone?" Mr. Henderson's voice sounded distant. I was remembering the closed casket funeral, how Michael's dental partner Dr. Williams had insisted the injuries were too severe for viewing. I thought about Rebecca, his 28-year-old secretary with the practiced smile and the way she'd touched Michael's arm when she thought no one was looking. She'd been at the funeral, dabbing her eyes with tissues and accepting condolences about losing such a wonderful boss. "Mrs. Patterson? The car accident," I managed to say. "The police report mentioned extensive damage." "Yes, ma'am. The vehicle was completely destroyed. But it appears..." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "It appears your husband wasn't in it when it crashed." The full scope of Michael's deception began crystallizing. He'd staged his own death, let me plan his funeral, watched me grieve while he hid somewhere with his secretary. Every tear I'd shed, every sleepless night, every moment of gut-wrenching loss had been orchestrated by the man I'd trusted with my life. But as the initial shock faded, something else began taking its place. Something colder and more calculating than grief. I reread the note, focusing on different details this time. Michael's casual dismissal of my intelligence. His assumption that I'd remain oblivious to our financial situation. His confidence that I'd simply accept his death and move on while he enjoyed the fruits of our 15-year marriage with another woman. He'd underestimated me completely. "Mr. Henderson, You said Mother's house would officially become his through inheritance. When did Michael's mother pass away? He consulted his files. Dorothy Patterson died 6 months ago. The estate should have been settled by now. 6 months. Michael had been planning this for at least 6 months, probably longer. While I was caring for his dying mother, bringing her soup and sitting by her bedside, he was calculating how to use her death as part of his escape plan. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. What happens now? I asked. Well, ma'am, we need to contact the authorities. This appears to be fraud of multiple types. Insurance fraud certainly, and possibly others. I nodded slowly, but my mind was racing in a different direction. Michael's legal death had been processed. His death certificate was already filed with the state. Social Security had been notified. Insurance companies had begun their investigations. In the eyes of the law, Michael Patterson was officially deceased. Which meant I was officially his widow. Which meant I was legally entitled to everything he owned. Including his mother's house, where I suspected he and Rebecca were currently playing house, completely unaware that their romantic hideaway now belonged to me. Mrs. Patterson? Should I contact the police? I looked up at Mr. Henderson, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt something other than crushing sadness. I felt the stirrings of something much more dangerous. Not just yet, I said carefully. I need some time to process this. To understand the full scope of what he's done. What I didn't tell him was that I was already beginning to understand exactly what Michael had done. And more importantly, I was beginning to understand what I was going to do about it. I folded the note and placed it in my purse. Thank you for calling me, Mr. Henderson. I'll be in touch about next steps. Walking to my car, I felt the weight of Michael's words in my purse. But instead of crushing me, that weight felt like ammunition. He'd handed me the perfect weapon against him, wrapped up in his own arrogance and sealed with his own handwriting. Michael thought he'd outsmarted everyone, especially me. He was about to learn just how wrong he could be. The morning after my crematorium revelation, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror applying mascara with steady hands. The woman looking back at me wore the same black dress I'd worn to Michael's memorial service, but something fundamental had shifted overnight. I was no longer the devastated widow everyone expected to see. I was an actress preparing for the most important performance of my life. Our family lawyer's office occupied the second floor of a Victorian building downtown, the same place where Michael and I had signed our wills 5 years earlier. Walking up those familiar stairs, I practiced my breathing, allowing just enough tremor in my voice to sound authentically fragile. Sandra, my dear, how are you holding up? Robert Caldwell had been handling our legal matters for over a decade. His concerned expression was genuine as he guided me to the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. I pulled a tissue from my purse and dabbed at my eyes. Some days are harder than others. I'm trying to be strong, but settling Michael's affairs feels so overwhelming. Of course it does. That's why I'm here to help you through this process. He opened a thick folder labeled with Michael's name. Now let's start with the immediate concerns. We need to transfer property deeds, update account ownership, and ensure you have access to everything you're entitled to as his widow. As Robert began explaining the legal procedures, I listened with the focused attention of someone memorizing a script. Every document he showed me, every account number he mentioned, every property description he read aloud was filed away in my mind like evidence in a criminal case. I had no idea Michael owned rental properties, I said, genuine surprise coloring my voice as Robert showed me deeds for 3 buildings in neighboring counties. Oh yes, he acquired these over the past few years. Quite the investor, your husband. The rental income should provide you with steady support during this difficult time. 3 properties I'd never heard of. Rental income that had never appeared in our household budget discussions. Michael had been living a financial double life, and I was only now seeing the full scope of his deception. But with each revelation I felt my strategic advantage growing stronger. And his investment accounts? I asked, maintaining my vulnerable widow act while internally cataloging every asset. Robert pulled out additional paperwork. Several accounts with different firms. He was quite diversified. Some of these show recent activity, though I'm not sure why he'd be moving money around so close to. He paused delicately. Well, before the accident. Recent activity. Money moved right before his staged death. Michael had been systematically preparing his financial escape, but in his arrogance he'd left a paper trail that now led directly to me. There's also his mother's estate to consider, Robert continued. Dorothy's house and remaining assets legally transferred to Michael 6 months ago, which means they now belong to you. I felt my pulse quicken but kept my expression appropriately mournful. Dorothy's house? I haven't been there since the funeral. It must be sitting empty. Actually, Robert frowned at his notes. The utility companies show active service at that address. Someone's been maintaining the property. Perhaps Michael arranged for a caretaker before his death. A caretaker. If only Robert knew how accurate that assessment was, though not in the way he imagined. Michael and Rebecca were indeed taking care of the property, my property. I should probably visit there soon, I said carefully. Make sure everything's secure. Excellent idea. In fact, I'll need to update all the property deeds to reflect your ownership. Standard procedure after a spouse's death. Over the next 2 hours, Robert walked me through the complete inventory of Michael's assets. With each document signed and each deed transferred, I felt the balance of power shifting further in my direction. Michael's carefully planned escape had inadvertently handed me control of his entire financial world. There's one more thing, Robert said, pulling out a final folder. Michael's life insurance policy. The insurance company will need to complete their investigation before releasing funds, but as his beneficiary, you should be aware of the process. Life insurance. Another piece of Michael's puzzle falling into place. He'd counted on that money being part of his fresh start with Rebecca, never imagining it would instead fund my response to his betrayal. Leaving Robert's office, I felt the weight of knowledge settling around me like armor. Michael owned far more than I'd realized, and now it was all legally mine. But I needed more information about his current situation before making my next move. My first stop was the dental office where Rebecca had worked. Dr. Williams, Michael's partner, greeted me with the same sympathetic expression I'd grown accustomed to seeing. Sandra, how thoughtful of you to stop by. We're all still processing Michael's loss. I wanted to thank Rebecca personally for her support during this difficult time, I said, noting how Dr. Williams's expression shifted slightly. Is she in today? Actually, Rebecca requested extended leave. She said losing Michael was particularly difficult for her, given how closely they worked together. He paused, choosing his words carefully. She mentioned needing time to process everything. Processing everything. What a delicate way to describe celebrating your lover's successful fake death while publicly mourning his supposed demise. Do you know when she might return? I'd love to send her a note. I'm not certain. She said she might not come back at all, that too many memories here would make it hard to move forward. Too many memories of conducting an affair with her boss, no doubt. Rebecca had burned her bridges at the dental office. Another indication that she and Michael were confident their new life was permanent. That afternoon, I drove past Dorothy's house for the first time since her funeral. The modest 2-story home sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, looking perfectly normal from the outside. But knowing what I now knew, every detail took on new significance. Fresh tire tracks in the driveway. Curtains that hadn't been there during Dorothy's final months. A small garden that someone had been tending. Michael and Rebecca had made themselves at home in his dead mother's house, completely unaware that I now owned every square inch of their romantic hideaway. Sitting in my car across the street, I watched for signs of movement. A shadow passed by an upstairs window. Someone was definitely living there, probably believing they were safe and undetected in their perfect refuge. I smiled for the first time since discovering Michael's betrayal. They thought they were hidden, protected, and financially secure. They had no idea that their sanctuary had become my property, that their refuge was now my weapon, and that their perfect plan had handed me everything I needed to destroy the new life they thought they'd built. The Grieving Widow Act had served its purpose. Now it was time to begin the real performance. The next morning I called Secure Home Solutions, a local company with excellent reviews and a reputation for discretion. When the receptionist asked about my security needs, I practiced the weary tone I'd perfected over the past few days. I recently inherited my mother-in-law's house after losing my husband, and I need to secure the property. There have been some concerns about break-ins in the neighborhood. Of course, ma'am. We can schedule an assessment for tomorrow afternoon. Will you be meeting our technicians there? Actually, I'd prefer if you could handle it independently. I'm still struggling with visiting places that hold so many memories. I paused for effect. Just change all the locks and install a comprehensive security system. I'll need remote access so I can monitor the property from home. Within 24 hours, I had complete surveillance coverage of Dorothy's house and every key to every door. The installation team had worked efficiently during the afternoon hours when, based on my earlier observation, Michael and Rebecca typically went out for groceries or errands. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened the security app on my phone. The house appeared quiet until around 8:30, when headlights swept across the front camera. A small blue sedan pulled into the driveway, Rebecca's car, according to my research at the dental office. I watched with fascination as Michael approached the front door, key in hand. He inserted it, turned it, and nothing happened. He tried again, jiggling the handle with increasing frustration. Rebecca joined him, and I could see their animated conversation through the camera's night vision, though I couldn't hear their words. They moved to the back door, then to windows, testing each one systematically. Michael's body language grew more agitated with each failed attempt. Finally, Rebecca pulled out her phone, probably calling a locksmith, while Michael stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the house that had suddenly become a fortress against him. The irony was delicious. Michael was locked out of his own mother's house by his supposedly grieving widow, and he had no legal recourse to complain about it. The following week, I began phase 2 of my plan. I called the city's building inspection department, explaining that I'd inherited property and wanted to ensure everything was up to code before deciding whether to rent or sell. We'll need to schedule electrical, plumbing, and structural inspections, the clerk explained. Can we access the property on Thursday morning? Absolutely. I believe there might be someone checking on the house occasionally, possibly a neighbor with a spare key. If anyone's there, just explain that these are routine inspections ordered by the new owner. Thursday morning brought the first real test of my strategy. Through the security cameras, I watched as Michael and Rebecca scrambled when the doorbell rang at 9 a.m. sharp. The electrical inspector stood patiently on the front porch while chaos erupted inside. Rebecca grabbed clothing and personal items, shoving them into bags. Michael frantically covered evidence of their habitation. Dishes, medications, anything that might indicate recent occupancy. They escaped through the back door just as the inspector began walking around the house's perimeter. For 20 minutes, I watched them huddled behind the garden shed, waiting for the official visit to end. Rebecca looked close to tears, while Michael kept checking his phone obsessively. The plumbing inspector arrived Friday, followed by a structural engineer on Monday. Each visit sent them into the same frantic routine of hiding evidence and sneaking out back doors. Their romantic hideaway was becoming a source of constant stress and paranoia. But my masterstroke came when I contacted Dorothy's utility companies. I'm settling my mother-in-law's estate and need to update service arrangements, I explained to each customer service representative. Dorothy Patterson passed away 6 months ago, and her son Michael died recently in an accident. I'm the surviving daughter-in-law, and I need to suspend services until I decide what to do with the property. I'm sorry for your losses, ma'am. We can suspend service immediately. Thank you. I appreciate your understanding during this difficult time. By Wednesday afternoon, Dorothy's house had no electricity, water, or gas. Through my security cameras, I watched Michael flip light switches repeatedly, his confusion evident even in the grainy footage. Rebecca tried the kitchen faucet, then the bathroom taps, growing more agitated with each failed attempt. That evening, they lit candles and used flashlights, their romantic sanctuary transformed into a survival situation. I observed Michael on his phone, probably calling utility companies and being told that service had been suspended at the property owner's request. The property owner. Me. Friday morning, I contacted Margaret Thornton, the most successful real estate agent in town. Her aggressive marketing style and large network of potential buyers made her perfect for my purposes. I have an inherited property I need to sell quickly, I explained during our phone consultation. It's a lovely 2-story home, but I can't bear to keep it after losing both my husband and mother-in-law recently. I completely understand, dear. Grief can make certain places feel overwhelming. I'll have the listing active by Monday and can start showing it immediately. That would be wonderful. I trust your judgment completely on pricing and showings. The for sale sign appeared Tuesday morning, a bright red beacon visible from every window of Dorothy's house. Through my cameras, I watched Michael discover it during what appeared to be an early morning reconnaissance of the neighborhood. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the sign as if it might disappear if he looked long enough. His phone call that afternoon was frantic, judging by his pacing and gestures. Rebecca joined him in the living room, and their conversation grew increasingly animated. She pointed toward the front yard where the sign stood, then threw her hands up in apparent exasperation. By Thursday, Margaret had scheduled the first showing. I watched a young couple tour the house with obvious interest, completely unaware that the home's illegal occupants were hiding in the basement utility room. The showing lasted 45 minutes, during which Michael and Rebecca remained cramped in their hiding space, probably terrified of making any noise that might reveal their presence. More showings followed throughout the week. Each one forced them into increasingly creative hiding spots and longer periods of uncomfortable concealment. Their dream house was becoming a nightmare of constant vigilance and fear. Through it all, I maintained my perfect widow performance for the outside world while privately relishing every moment of their growing desperation. The security cameras had become my entertainment system, showing me a real-time documentary of Michael's carefully planned life crumbling into chaos. He'd wanted to make me feel helpless and abandoned. Instead, he'd made himself a prisoner in his own supposed refuge, while I held every key to his freedom. The tables hadn't just turned, they'd been completely rebuilt with me as the architect. The psychological warfare escalated when I made my first call to the county code enforcement office. I discovered that as a property owner dealing with unauthorized occupancy, I had several legal avenues to create pressure without directly confronting the situation myself. "I'm concerned about my inherited property," I explained to Officer Martinez, a sympathetic woman who'd handled similar cases. "I think someone might be living there illegally and I'm worried about liability issues." "Have you observed evidence of occupancy?" "Strange patterns with garbage pickup, lights on at odd hours, and neighbors have mentioned seeing people coming and going. As the property owner, I need this documented officially." Officer Martinez scheduled an inspection for the following Tuesday. Through my security cameras, I watched her arrive precisely at 10 a.m., clipboard in hand. When she knocked on the front door, I could see Michael and Rebecca's panicked scramble through the interior cameras I'd had installed. They'd become experts at their disappearing act, but this time was different. Officer Martinez wasn't just checking the property and leaving, she was conducting a thorough investigation. She walked the perimeter, noting evidence of habitation: recent tire tracks, fresh cigarette butts, a small vegetable garden that someone had been tending. Most damaging was the garbage situation. Rebecca had been putting out trash regularly, but using Dorothy's old address labels. Officer Martinez photographed everything, creating an official record of unauthorized occupancy. The violation notice that appeared on the front door 2 days later was just the beginning. I'd also contacted the health department, expressing concerns about potential unsanitary conditions in an unoccupied property. "Sometimes squatters create health hazards," I explained to the inspector. "I want to ensure the property is safe before I decide whether to rent or sell." These official visits created a pattern of constant intrusion that transformed their sanctuary into a source of perpetual anxiety. Every knock on the door could be another inspector, another violation, another step closer to discovery. But my most devastating move was financial. Michael's death certificate had been processed through every relevant agency, and I began systematically using it to dismantle his economic foundation. I started with his credit cards. Each company's bereavement department was sympathetic and efficient when I called to report the cardholder's death. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Patterson. We'll cancel all cards immediately and settle the account through estate procedures." His bank accounts followed the same pattern. As his legal widow, I provided death certificates and transferred everything into estate management under my control. Michael's checking account, his savings, even the small account he'd maintained for business expenses, all of it became mine to manage. The cellular phone company was particularly satisfying to contact. "Mr. Patterson's line will be terminated immediately," the customer service representative confirmed. "Any remaining balance will be settled through the estate." I imagined Michael trying to make calls and discovering his phone had been deactivated. No way to contact utility companies, no way to arrange new services, no way to maintain the digital connections that modern life required. Every financial thread that Michael had counted on for his new life was systematically cut. He'd planned to access their joint accounts, use his credit cards, maintain his normal spending patterns while officially being dead. Instead, he found himself completely cut off from the economic foundation he'd built over 15 years of marriage. Through my property management research, I discovered that Rebecca had been calling utility companies from Dorothy's landline, trying to restore services. The phone records, available to me as the property owner investigating unauthorized usage, revealed increasingly desperate conversations. She tried to set up new accounts under her name, but without established credit history at that address and with mounting questions about her relationship to the property, these attempts repeatedly failed. Utility companies had become suspicious of the irregular requests and conflicting information they were receiving. Michael's attempts were even more revealing. Using borrowed phones and false names, he tried to restore services by claiming to be Dorothy's nephew or a property caretaker. These lies unraveled quickly when utility companies cross-referenced their information with official property ownership records that showed me as the sole legal owner. My confidence grew with each successful maneuver. The same attention to detail that had made me an effective household manager was now being channeled into strategic warfare. I maintained detailed spreadsheets tracking every action I'd taken, every agency I'd contacted, every pressure point I'd activated. The woman Michael had dismissed as a passive, dependent wife was revealing capabilities he'd never bothered to notice. I'd always handled our household logistics, managed our social calendar, coordinated repairs and services, skills that translated perfectly into coordinating his systematic isolation. Sleep came easier now than it had in months. Instead of lying awake replaying moments of betrayal, I spent my evenings planning the next day's moves. The grief that had once consumed me had transformed into focused energy directed toward a clear goal. Meanwhile, our small town's natural tendency toward gossip was working in my favor. I'd mentioned my squatter problem to a few key neighbors, who'd naturally shared the information with others. Dorothy's house, once invisible in its suburban normalcy, had become a focal point of community attention. Mrs. Chun from next door began walking her dog past the house twice daily, noting license plates and activity patterns. The mailman, Charlie, started paying closer attention to delivery requests and suspicious mail forwarding attempts. Even teenage neighbors began treating the house as entertainment, occasionally gathering across the street to see if they could spot the mysterious unauthorized occupants. Michael and Rebecca's every movement was being observed by an informal neighborhood watch network that had formed around my property concerns. Their isolation was becoming complete, trapped inside a house they couldn't legally occupy, surrounded by a community that was actively monitoring their presence, cut off from financial resources, and facing mounting official pressure from multiple government agencies. The psychological pressure was working exactly as I'd intended. Through my security cameras, I could see the toll it was taking. Their conversations appeared more strained, their movements more paranoid, their entire existence reduced to hiding and surviving rather than enjoying their supposed romantic escape. Michael had wanted to start fresh. Instead, he was discovering what it meant to have no foundation at all. The call came at 7:23 p.m. on a Thursday evening, 3 months and 2 days after Mr. Henderson's revelation at the crematorium. I was in my kitchen preparing dinner when my phone rang with an unknown number. Something about the timing and the unfamiliar digits made my pulse quicken before I even answered. Sandra, please don't hang up. Michael's voice hit me like ice water. After months of watching him through security cameras, hearing his actual words felt surreal. He sounded older, strained, with an edge of panic I'd never heard during our 15 years of marriage. Who is this? I asked, though we both knew the charade was pointless. It's me. We need to talk. There are some complications with Mother's house, and I think there's been a misunderstanding. Complications. Misunderstanding. The careful language of a man trying to discuss his fake death without actually admitting to fraud over a phone line that might be recorded. I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number. My husband is dead. Sandra, please. I know this is confusing, but there are things about the accident that weren't. That didn't happen the way people think. I can explain everything if you'll just listen. I let him talk, settling into my kitchen chair with the satisfaction of a chess player watching an opponent realize they're in checkmate. His voice carried the desperate energy of someone who'd run out of options and was grasping for any lifeline. The house. Mother's house. There's been a mistake with the utilities. And there's a for sale sign that shouldn't be there. Someone's been scheduling inspections and causing problems for the people who are supposed to be taking care of the property. The people taking care of the property. Even now, in his desperation, Michael couldn't bring himself to admit what he'd done. I don't know what you're talking about, I said calmly. I inherited that house when my husband died. As the legal owner, I have every right to maintain it however I see fit. But you don't understand, there are people there who were helping me with arrangements. Before the accident. They can't just be thrown out without notice. Arrangements for what? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, his voice came back smaller and more defeated. Xander, please. Whatever you think you know about what happened, we can work this out. But you have to stop the sale and turn the utilities back on. These people are in a very difficult situation. That's when I decided to end his misery of uncertainty. Michael, I know exactly what happened. I know about your fake death. I know about Rebecca. I know about the note you left in the casket promising her a fresh start funded by my grief. And I know you're both living illegally in my house. The house I inherited when you legally died. The silence this time was profound. I could picture his face, that particular expression he got when one of his schemes unraveled in ways he hadn't anticipated. How did you? The crematorium director called me 3 months ago. Your love letter to Rebecca was quite informative. Did you really think you could orchestrate your own death and I'd just play the grieving widow forever? Sandra, listen to me carefully. This isn't what you think. Rebecca and I are squatting in my house without permission while you're legally dead and she's unemployed. I know exactly what this is, Michael. What I don't think you understand is what I've done about it. I began listing everything methodically. The security cameras, the cancelled utilities, the closed bank accounts, the terminated credit cards, the code enforcement violations, the health department inspections, the real estate listing. Every account you thought you could access, closed. Every credit card you planned to use, cancelled due to cardholder death. Your phone plan, terminated. Your mother's house, mine legally and currently listed for sale. Your rental properties, also mine. Your investment accounts, transferred to my control as your widow. With each item I mentioned, his breathing grew more labored. By the time I finished, he was audibly hyperventilating. You can't do this. Those accounts, those properties, half of that is mine. You're dead, Michael. Dead people don't own property. Dead people don't have rights. You made sure of that when you filed your own death certificate. This is insane. You're destroying everything we built together. No, you destroyed it when you decided to fake your death and steal our assets to fund your affair. I'm just making sure you stay dead. That's when I heard Rebecca's voice in the background, sharp with panic. She'd clearly been listening to his side of the conversation. What does she mean we can't access the accounts? You said we had money saved. Rebecca, not now. You said your mother left you money. You said we'd be financially secure. Their argument escalated quickly. 3 months of pressure and isolation had apparently frayed their relationship to the breaking point. Rebecca's voice grew louder and more accusatory as the reality of their situation crystallized. You told me she was stupid. You said she'd never figure out how to manage money or property. You said she'd be too grief-stricken to pay attention. She was supposed to be. Michael's admission hung in the air between us. Even in his desperation, his fundamental disrespect for my intelligence remained unchanged. Here's what's going to happen, I said, cutting through their argument. You have 48 hours to remove yourselves and all your belongings from my property. After that, I'm calling the police to report trespassers. Sandra, you don't understand what you're asking. We have nowhere else to go. Rebecca lost her job and I can't. You can't what? Get a job? Open a bank account? Rent an apartment? Of course you can't. You're legally dead. You made yourself a ghost, Michael, and ghosts don't get to live in the real world. The power in my voice surprised even me. 4 months I'd been operating behind the scenes, pulling strings and manipulating circumstances. Now, speaking directly to the man who'd betrayed me, I felt the full scope of my control. You wanted to start fresh? Congratulations. You can start with absolutely nothing, just like you left me with. The difference is I'm still legally alive. What about Rebecca? She didn't know about the fake death until after. Rebecca knew she was having an affair with a married man. Whatever other lies you told her are between you two. My concern is getting squatters out of my house. I hung up on his protests, my hands surprisingly steady as I set the phone down. Outside my kitchen window the evening light was fading, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was stepping into brightness rather than darkness. The tables had completely turned, and Michael was finally learning what it felt like to be powerless in the face of someone else's calculated decisions. The security footage from Friday night was everything I'd hoped to see. At 2:17 a.m. headlights swept across Dorothy's driveway as Rebecca's small sedan pulled up to the house one final time. Through the night vision cameras, I watched Michael and Rebecca move like shadows, loading their belongings with the desperate efficiency of people who knew they were running out of time. They had so little to pack. 3 months of hiding had reduced their grand romantic escape to a few suitcases and garbage bags. Michael carried a box that looked like it contained his electronics, while Rebecca struggled with what appeared to be her clothing and personal items. The contrast with their confident arrival months earlier was stark. Then they'd been moving into what they thought was their secret palace, now they were fleeing like refugees. I watched Michael take one last look at the house before getting into the passenger seat. Even through the grainy security footage, his body language conveyed defeat. Rebecca drove, her posture rigid with what I assumed was anger and disillusionment. They disappeared into the night at 2:43 a.m. and I never saw them again. The silence that followed felt profound. 4 months, those cameras had shown me glimpses of their declining situation. Their arguments, their anxiety, their mounting desperation. Now the screens showed empty rooms and still hallways. Dorothy's house was finally mine without the complication of unwanted occupants. But more than the physical space, I'd reclaimed something much more valuable: my sense of self. The woman who discovered Michael's betrayal 4 months earlier had been devastated, lost, completely unprepared for the reality of his calculated cruelty. The woman who'd watched him flee into the night was someone entirely different. I discovered capabilities I never knew I possessed: strategic thinking, financial acumen, psychological warfare skills that would have seemed impossible during my years as Michael's conventional wife. His betrayal had inadvertently freed me from limitations I hadn't even realized existed. For 15 years I'd been the supportive spouse, the capable household manager, the woman who handled details while her husband made the important decisions. Michael's fake death had forced me to become the decision-maker, and I discovered I was remarkably good at it. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. Within weeks of the squatter situation being resolved, neighbors began approaching me with genuine admiration. "Sandra, the way you've handled everything is just remarkable," Mrs. Chin told me during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "Managing inherited property while dealing with grief. And you solved that whole problem so efficiently. Most people would have just called the police immediately," added Tom Morrison from down the street. "But you handled it through proper legal channels, documented everything correctly. Very impressive." The respect in their voices felt different from the polite sympathy I'd received as Michael's widow. This was recognition of my competence, my intelligence, my ability to handle complex problems independently. People saw me as formidable now, not fragile. The real estate agent, Margaret Thornton, was particularly vocal about my capabilities when she called to discuss removing the house from the market. "I have to say, Sandra, your approach to the unauthorized occupancy situation was masterful. You created documented legal pressure while maintaining complete professional distance. I've seen property owners get emotional and make mistakes, but you handled everything perfectly." I decided to keep Dorothy's house rather than sell it. The decision surprised even me initially, but the more I considered it, the more symbolically important it became. This was the place where Michael had thought he'd found sanctuary with his lover, where he'd planned to enjoy the fruits of his betrayal. Instead, it would generate rental income that would fund my new independence. The renovation took 6 weeks and transformed the house completely. I removed every trace of Michael and Rebecca's occupancy: new paint, new flooring, updated fixtures, fresh landscaping. The master bedroom where they'd shared their stolen romance became a bright, airy space with no connection to their deception. The kitchen where they'd played house was modernized with clean lines and neutral colors. By the time I finished, Dorothy's house looked better than it had in decades. The first tenant, a young teacher named Emily, fell in love with it immediately. The rental income alone would be enough to support my comfortable lifestyle, but it was the psychological satisfaction that mattered most. Every month when Emily's rent payment arrived, I was reminded that Michael's supposed refuge had become my financial foundation. The place where he'd thought he was safe from the consequences of his actions was now generating the means for my continued independence from him. Looking back 6 months later, I realized that my methodical approach had been far more satisfying than immediate justice would have been. Simply calling the police that first day would have resulted in arrests and prosecutions, but it wouldn't have given Michael the extended experience of powerlessness that he'd inflicted on me. Instead, he'd lived for months with the same uncertainty and fear I'd experienced after discovering his betrayal. He'd learned what it meant to have no control over his circumstances, no resources to fall back on, no safety net to catch him when everything collapsed. Most importantly, he discovered that the woman he'd dismissed as helpless was actually capable of systematically dismantling his entire world. The revenge was complete, but it had become about more than just payback. Through the process of reclaiming my power, I discovered who I really was beneath 15 years of being Mrs. Michael Patterson. I was stronger, smarter, and more capable than either of us had ever imagined. Michael had wanted to kill his old life and start fresh. In the end, he'd succeeded, but I was the one who'd been reborn. He was somewhere out there living as a ghost of his former self, while I was finally living as my truest self. The woman he'd tried to destroy had become more powerful than the woman he'd married. That seemed like the most perfect justice of all. If this story of calculated revenge had you completely hooked, smash that like button right now. My favorite part was when Sandra calmly revealed she knew everything during that terrified phone call, watching Michael's world crumble in real time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more jaw-dropping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.